ready to be here, ready to go. We have the beautiful fall theme going on. All right. Are we raring to go?
Yes.
All right. So we are at the middle to end of chapter 5, and we're going to be moving on to chapter 6. And so we're talking a bit about genetic modifications. For those of you who are on Facebook these days, you probably read all kinds of stuff about genetically modified foods and what happens if you eat something that's not real food. And so I thought this was kind of funny because it came up on my Facebook today. Sometimes I feel like Facebook is spying on me. Like they see what I'm doing in other parts of my life that aren't connected to Facebook. So it makes me wonder, like, do you ever wonder, like, if Facebook has turned on your audio on your phone and is, like, listening to you? Maybe that's only me. But they sent me this photo today, and I thought that was interesting. So there is a video which I can't play on here because I don't have any audio cables, but I will post it on the website. It is a great video on understanding what exactly genes are. Sometimes in listening to me, and I get really in-depth into things, and I talk for long periods of time, and I think it can kind of all mesh together. This is a great video. It's like 4 minutes long, and I think it goes from DNA to genes to chromosomes to traits to life, and now I have the hiccups. And I think it gives a great understanding of that. And this website is generally a really, really good website. I forget what the name of it is, but it was really fascinating. Let's see, if I open it on YouTube, I might be able to see where it's from. Something like Clearly Stated or Simply Stated. If you're ever looking for really great biology videos to explain things, it's one of the things about going through YouTube is that you can find lots of videos about things. Sometimes the videos are really terrible. So this one was a really great video about DNA and genes, and apparently my internet is taking forever. Stated Clearly, that's what it's called. So if you want to watch that, I think that's an excellent resource. So let me go back to this. I won't show it to you right now, but if you want to watch that, I think it's a great summary to help you understand. And now, of course, I can't get this going. There we go. Okay, so in talking about genetically modified foods, one of the things that I talked about on Thursday was golden rice. So if you think about one of the problems all around the world, it's that we have a lot of malnutrition. People may have plenty of food, but the food might not be very good for them. So, for example, this is one of the best examples. Golden rice is a genetically modified food that has been, white rice has been infused with the genes from daffodils to make it have more vitamin A in it. And in increasing the amount of vitamin A that people who eat this golden rice are getting, this can help to prevent cases of blindness, because vitamin A deficiencies are something that leads to blindness. So if you can genetically modify the foods to contain this vitamin, it technically could help with vitamin deficiencies and malnutrition. And how do we get that? We get that by splicing the gene of a daffodil with the genes in a bacteria. The bacteria grows this genome and is then put into the golden rice. So we go from having white rice, which basically has no nutrition, to having golden rice, which is very high in nutrition. It's got this vitamin A. So how do we do that? And that's through gene splicing with a bacteria. Now, some of the people that are out there think that we're playing God with our food, or that we are making our food unsafe to eat. So far, we haven't found that the genetic modifications have caused the problems in humans, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. If you look at genetically modified foods, especially here in the United States, we are all consuming genetically modified foods every day. And we don't even know or really think about it. If you have eaten a corn product today, which probably everybody in here has, you've eaten a genetically modified food. If you're wearing cotton, cotton is genetically modified so that it can have pesticides that are woven into its genetics so that insects don't go in and eat it and kill off the crops. If you've eaten soybeans today, which probably everybody does, you don't even think about the fillers in your food that are making them so they have more protein in them. Soybeans are a major component of foods here in America, and it says almost 85% of your soybeans are genetically modified, almost 45% of the corn, 76% of the cotton. So we don't even think about that here in America. If you were to go to Europe, however, they have different labeling laws, and so the labeling laws say that you have to label everything that's genetically modified, and therefore people that are in Europe are thinking about that all the time. And they don't want to eat genetically modified foods because they think that they are unnatural. Here in America, we don't think about that so much. And who's right? It's hard to ultimately tell. They haven't been proven to be dangerous. Otherwise, they wouldn't be feeding them to us, unless you're kind of a conspiracy theorist. But it's just different ways of looking at things. If you look at Europe versus America, there's much different rates of obesity. And so, oh, that reminds me to turn off my phone. So there's much different rates of obesity in Europe versus the United States, but that could be due to lots of different reasons. We eat very differently than people in Europe do. So one of the reasons that we genetically modify our food is to make our crops insect resistant. If you think about 30 years ago, they used to have crop dusters where the planes would fly over the crops and they would spray out this big spray of pesticides in order to keep the crops from being eaten by these pests. Here you see a tomato worm. It used to be that grasshoppers would eat up our corn. We have all kinds of insect problems. So what if instead of spraying our crops with pesticides or insecticides, we could just weave that right into the genetic material of the plants, and then the insects wouldn't eat them in the first place. So it seems like a good idea if we weave it into the genetics of the plant, then we don't have to spray so many chemicals on our crops. But then you start thinking, well, if we're not spraying it on our crops, but our crops are genetically engineered to kill off things that eat it, and then we eat it, you tend to think, well, that's probably not very good for us. So we might be able to reduce the amount of pesticides that we're spraying on our plants, but creating this internal genetically created pesticide may be creating new problems that we don't even know about. Now, of course, it's not that we are putting this into our bloodstream, or if you think about DDT, which is something that we're going to talk about in lab, DDT is a chemical that hurts our wildlife and gets into our drinking water. There's lots of different pesticides, lots of different insecticides. Spraying them in chemical form is one problem, but actually weaving them into the genetics of our plants, once it goes through our gut and gets broken apart by the acids in our stomach, are they still the same problems that we would have just by spraying them? So here's one great example of a insecticide that is genetically woven into a plant. So here we've got a corn plant that was being destroyed by insects. So as you can imagine, these tasty, tasty corn plants, the grasshoppers come along and they want to eat them up. And so what scientists have done is they've taken a bacterium and they've woven a Bt crystal gene into the bacterial DNA, that circular DNA that's inside of the bacteria. So they then take this plant cell right here and put the gene of interest from the bacteria into the corn genome. So this bacterial gene that codes, now I'm going to get code and corn mixed up. The bacterial gene that codes for Bt crystals, which are poisonous to insect pests, is then inserted into the plant's DNA. So here's where people start to get kind of worried about genetic modifications. And you can understand why they are worried about this. If you're growing a poison inside of a bacteria and then putting it in our food, is that healthy for us? And just because we found that in the short term that it's okay, no long-term studies have been done on this because we've only been doing this for probably the last 10 to 15 years. So what if we end up finding out that 30 years later this causes cancer or it causes mutations in our cells? That's kind of the issue with genetic modification, is that we can tell in the short term that it's not doing anything to humans, but it's killing these insects, and is that really good for us in the long term? So we've got the bacterium, it's got the Bt crystals in it, we put it in these plant cells, then we grow the plant cells, and it is toxic to these insect pests. The corn is producing a toxic chemical that kills off the pests. So therefore, we don't have to spray it with pesticides, but it's making pesticides internally. So you can kind of see where the controversy might be. So another thing that we have is herbicide resistance. If you've ever read about Monsanto or any of those big companies that are producing these seeds, and then the Roundup, which is the pesticide that's being sprayed on top of the crops, the herbicide is killing off weeds so that we're only putting our water and our work into getting the crops that we want and not the weeds. And so if we kill off weeds, if we kill them off with herbicide, then we then eat the herbicide. If we produce the herbicide inside of them, then we're eating the plant that has the herbicide in it. So it's really kind of someplace we think is safe, but you can never really be sure in the long run. Here is something that's also interesting as far as genetic modification goes. We've been able to modify the genes of salmon so that if you look at the wild-caught salmon, which is the one that's there on the bottom, that is what a salmon, we could say, should look like. And the one on top has different genes that have been engineered into the salmon cells so that it grows faster, so that it's got more meat on it. And you can see why that's a commercially a good thing, because the bigger your salmon, the faster they grow, the more money you can get from the salmon meat. So sounds good to the people that are producing the salmon, but is it good for humans in the long term? It's kind of a question that you can definitely delve deeper into. This one is really interesting because they have grown featherless birds, and if you look at it, they call it the Franken-chicken. The Franken-chicken has no feathers, and so if you think a part of the process in making our chicken is that they slaughter the chickens and then they have to get the feathers off of them. So what if we take out one part in that process? What if we make it so that you don't have to pluck the chickens if they come pre-plucked? Sounds like it would be a good idea, except that these chickens if you think about why chickens would have feathers on the outside anyways, it's to protect them from the UV lights in the sun. It's to protect them from the insects, just as you and I, when our skin is exposed, we get mosquito bites. They get eaten up by mosquitoes. And so featherless birds are cheaper for farmers, and you can get cheaper meat from them. But what are we doing to our food when we're taking the natural resistance away from these birds? They're finding that these types of chickens get cancer. Think about it. If your chicken is outside running around and he naturally has feathers to protect his skin, now he doesn't, and he's sitting in the UV light, that same UV light that you're told to stay out of and put sunscreen on your skin for, he's running around out there and he's getting bit by mosquitoes. Mosquitoes these days have West Nile virus. They're carrying all kinds of blood-borne toxins. And so there really should be some fear to genetically modifying our foods. And so I think as scientists we have to say, just because we can make this, should we? It's a definite question, and it's something for you to be conscious of as a consumer of food. Would you want to eat a chicken who could have cancer from sun exposure, who could have West Nile virus from getting bit by mosquitoes? It's definitely something for you to think about when you think about the food that you eat. I hope some of you think about that. So, what? I know, but you know, you think about being a vegetarian and then you hear that they're weaving the genetically modified genes into our corn, into our tomatoes. So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. You're going to have to survive on like protein shakes or something. And then protein shakes are made out of soybeans, and those are genetically modified too. So it's like you can almost be scared about anything that you eat. And I don't want to put fear into you, but I want you to think about your food and be able to make decisions about what you're eating. So this is one of the rallies that they're having in Europe, where they're completely anti-genetically modified organisms. So some of the fears that they have, like the things that we just talked about, is that, first of all, what if we create organisms that we want to be able to kill, but they become invincible? Like, let's say that I'm going to just pick the salmon example. Let's say that we think that we're making these bigger, better fish that are making more meat and they're making it faster. What if those salmon get out into the ocean and then they breed with other fish and they make fish that we're unable to kill? Or what if they make a different level to the food chain, so they're eating something that we want to eat, or they're getting eaten by something that we don't want to eat it? When you're playing around with the food system out there, it may be that certain things get out that we want to be able to kill that we can't. If you read about Monsanto, then you may hear about genetically modified crops that we want to be able to kill off, but we can't ever kill them. The second fear, organisms that we don't want to kill may be killed inadvertently. So let's say that Monsanto is making these crops, and I'm just hypothesizing here. This isn't things that have happened that I know of. You never really know, though. So let's say that we make some kind of corn that is resistant to insects, and we don't want it to be able to be killed, but then it gets killed inadvertently. Like if any of you have heard of the potato famine in Ireland, where they had a fungus that got onto the potatoes that were something like 90% of the people's diets. And then when all of the potatoes died, all the people that were dependent on the potatoes, they starved and they didn't have their food source. So what if we all become dependent on this corn, and then all of the corn dies because we're messing with it, and we don't have our food source anymore? Then who survives? The people with guns or the people that are rich? So I guess there's kind of your conspiracy theory there. And then fear number 3, genetically modified crops are not tested or regulated. So what if they make some kind of crop that gives everybody cancer and we just don't know it for 10 more years? Or what if it causes diseases in our cows? And if we're dependent on beef, what if it kills off all of our beef cows? 4 more fears, or 3 more fears, eating genetically modified foods is dangerous. It could be dangerous. They're saying, you know, when you're putting pesticides and herbicides into our food, then that can be dangerous. Then loss of genetic diversity among crop plants is risky. I think that is actually one of the biggest fears, because if you think about out there, we have all kinds of varieties of food to eat. Let's just pick corn. If there's only one brand of corn out there and something kills that brand of corn or species of corn, then all the corn goes away, and what is it that we get to eat then? So if we lose genetic diversity, if we don't have lots of varieties of things, like think of your apples. You go to the grocery store, you've got 20 different kinds of apples you can buy. If something kills off all the Golden Delicious apples, we still have 19 other species of apples we can eat. Yes?
Are there such things as seed banks where you take things like that and they keep genetic records that you know at some point?
Yes, they do have that, and that is exactly to combat that fear. Because if we don't keep that species diversity alive, it's the same reason we say save the rainforest, because what if we kill off the one species of flower that has the cure for cancer? You never know what you're killing at what point could hold the keys to our future. So that's why they talk about wanting to save species. But then you also have to question, do we really mean every species? Like, we're working to kill bacteria, so should we say, like, don't kill the bacteria that's on the floors in this classroom? At what level do you say, save the species? Should we save bacteria? Should we save the minnows? Should we be saving these insects? Should we be saving our foods? It's really it's an interesting balance, and it's an interesting question. And then finally, hidden costs may reduce the financial advantages of genetically modified crops. So maybe these genetically modified organisms, like with the Franken chicken, it may have hidden costs that we don't even think about ahead of time. Maybe those chickens we can't let outside because they're going to get cancer from the sun and they're going to get mosquito bites. So we have to house them in a special new way. We have to feed them special foods. So there may be costs that we hadn't anticipated for the future. So it's really interesting to think of, just because we can do it to our food, should we do it to our food? So biotechnology has the potential for improving human health and for criminal justice. We've talked a bit about eyewitnesses, and now with DNA fingerprinting, rather than just relying on, well, I think that person is the person that committed the crime, we can actually go collect DNA evidence. Biotechnology has the potential for improving human health, and I think I'm a great example of that, because as a diabetic, I definitely would not still be alive without biotechnology making the insulin that keeps me alive every day. So, yep, and people that have cancer and a lot of the different diseases that are out there, we are now being able to, one, prevent diseases, but we're also seeing new diseases that are popping up. So that's definitely something to think about. We can cure certain diseases that have been around for years and years and years, ever since there have been humans, but there are new ones that are popping up. We have also been able to treat diseases that before would have been a death sentence. If I would have been born 100 years ago, I would have been toast at 8 years old when I got diabetes. And so now I'm capable. I've been around for 30 more years since I got diabetes, and they've been able to treat that, and I've been able to be relatively healthy. So they actually talk in the book about diabetes, which I think is really interesting. I actually went looking for some videos today about creating human insulin. Used to be back when I got diabetes in 1985 that everybody that had diabetes took insulin that came from pig pancreases. So they would go into the slaughterhouses where they made bacon and pork products, and they would take the pancreases from these pigs that were being slaughtered, and they'd put them into a blender and blend them all up, and then get the impurities out, much like you guys have been looking at in the lab this week, where you're putting strawberries and chicken liver in the blender. They would put these pancreas into a blender, and they would extract all of the insulin out, and they would purify it as much as possible, and then they would take the insulin, put it in a vial, ship it off to me, and I would take a shot of that insulin every day, and it allowed me to stay alive. Now, part of the problem with that, as you can imagine, if you've ever known anybody who's had an organ transplant and has taken transplant drugs, when I'm taking the insulin from a pig is obviously not me. It's pretty close, pretty similar as a species, pretty similar in DNA, but it's not human and it's not me. And so my body used the insulin, but a lot of people, they found that they were allergic to pig insulin. If you're diabetic and you're allergic to pig insulin, and that's the only option that you've got, you either take it or you're not going to be able to survive. So one of the big advantages in the technologies that have come about is that we've been able to produce what's called human insulin. And the way that they've done that is, let's see if I have a, oh, I don't have a picture of it. They've taken bacteria and they've introduced the human insulin gene into it. So these E. coli bacteria, E. coli are found in your body naturally, so they're already found inside of humans, and they were able to make these E. coli bacteria that produced human insulin. So they would have these giant vats of E. coli that they would then take and they would pulverize them and take the insulin out of them and purify it and then give it to me. And so rather than having pig insulin, which is not even the same species, now they're making human insulin, and it's the same species. But one of the obvious problems with that is that even though it's making human insulin, it's not making the exact same insulin that my body is making. So one of the technologies that I believe will come about here in the recent future, or the very soon, is that they will find some way to make personalized medicine. I think they'll take my genes and they'll make insulin in bacteria that is identical to the insulin that I make in my body. So that way, no type of reaction, no type of rejection. It will be exactly the insulin that my body would make if I had a pancreas that was making insulin. So they may do that with stem cells. It may be through gene therapy. There's lots of really interesting advantages out there to personalizing medicine. So what if you had the exact medicine made with your exact DNA to cure you or treat the diseases that you had? I think that that's really a fascinating technology and something that's coming up here in the future. So some other things that your body makes that they have been able to create inside of bacteria using recombinant DNA or putting this human factor into bacterial DNA is that they have created human growth hormone. So athletes these days, bigger, stronger, faster. Anybody who works out really hard knows that if you take a shot of human growth hormone, that can help you to achieve results that you never would have been able to get naturally. And I think that as far as athletics goes, it's not really legal to do because it's seen as having an unfair advantage. And also, it causes some health risks that they're not really comfortable out there with. Erythropoietin, I believe, is blood doping. And what that is giving your blood extra oxygen, because if you take in extra oxygen, you're able to do more work and lift more weights and run faster and work out longer. And so blood doping, which I think is something that's pretty, maybe you guys know this, it's pretty undetectable unless they know what your red blood cell oxygen levels are. It's illegal, but it's something that people do. And a lot of times they do it during training, but they won't do it during the actual contest or the actual event. And it helps them to be able to train longer and harder and faster and get better, and then try to not look like they're doing anything during the performance. So I kind of go back and forth. Should this be illegal? Should it not be illegal? You know, I'm of the scientific mindset of like, well, if we can do it, let's totally do it. But what's going to happen to these athletes down the road? Is it going to hurt them in some way that's going to be a long-term problem? What?
When it causes lung disease and all that?
Oh yeah, it can cause all kinds of diseases. But if these people assume the risk, should they be allowed to do it just because they can? I mean, it is money not just to the medical companies, but to the athletic associations, and you know, what you do in your personal time, it affects a lot of the monetary decisions. So it's really interesting. On the other hand, it also takes a lot of money to detect these things. So there's money in doing it, and there's money in trying to prevent it. It's interesting. So gene therapy has come a long way in helping to diagnose and prevent diseases. So we can take certain types of genetic tests to find out, like, if you know that you have certain diseases in your family, you may be able to find out if your children, your offspring, are going to have them. You may be able to find out that you may have something like heart disease running in your family or cancer running in your family. If you've heard anything about the breast cancer gene, now that it's detectable, it can almost tell 90% whether or not you could get breast cancer or not. So now we can tell people that they're going to get these diseases, but we may not be able to do anything about it. So you think personally, just because you might know that 40 years down the line you have the genes that are going to give you cancer, but you can't do anything about it, would you still want to know? Would you want to worry for 40 years knowing that there's nothing you can do about it?
If you were potentially getting breast cancer, couldn't you just have them removed?
Right, like Angelina Jolie had the breast cancer gene, but so it says 90% you have the gene that's going to cause breast cancer, but what if she was in the 10% who wasn't going to get it? Now they have the mastectomies that they can do. What if, should she be allowed to have children, that she's then going to pass the genes along to her children? I mean, think about that. If I knew that I had cancer in my genes, would I want to have a child that I know then is going to have cancer as well? So just because you know about it and you can't do anything about it, do you still want to know?
Is that like the sickle cell thing?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. If you know that you're going to have sickle cell anemia, there are certainly treatments for it, but there's no cure for it.
Traits, like if you, because we did research on it in high school, but like if you have the trait and you, like if your spouse has it too, the child could automatically have
Exactly.
sickle cell. It's automatically a high risk.
Right.
And if you know you have the trait, but like say if your spouse don't, would you like, is that the same thing?
Then you have a 50% chance of passing it on. So then do you still have children if you know that there's a 50% chance? Who gets to decide whether 50% chance is enough? Like, should we be allowed to tell people, should I be able to say to you, don't have kids, there's 50% chance that they're going to have sickle cell? Or who gets to decide that? Like, What if your insurance company finds out that you have a 50% chance of passing that along to your offspring? Then what if your insurance company says, I'm not going to pay for any treatments because you knew that was going to happen? Once the insurance gets a hold of it, then what if you don't have insurance? What if it's the government? What if the government says, Amy, I know you're going to pass on diabetes to your child. It's not true. I have type 1 diabetes, not type 2. What if they know that I'm going to pass it along to my child, so they say, we're going to sterilize you. So should they get to decide things like that? Who gets to decide? And if you knew you were going to have a disease that you're going to pass on to your children, should the government decide you don't have children? Should you decide you don't have children? Or since there's no cure, do we just not find out? It's really an interesting ethical and moral and legal question. You know, it takes you back to the Holocaust and the time of thinking that people had inferior genes. And so if you were blonde-haired and blue-eyed, then are you the only ones that get to survive? I mean, there goes, what, like 99% of all of us in the room. So who gets to decide those things? It's really a fascinating question. So it's something I could talk about forever. So just as we were just talking about screenings, so now couples that know that they may have that risk of passing along these genetic disorders to their children, they have this screening called Tay-Sachs disease. And this one hits home to me because I had my best friend who lived in Texas. She got pregnant. She had a Tay-Sachs gene that ran in her family. So she got genetically tested to find out whether her child was going to be born with Tay-Sachs disease. And the test, not 100% accurate, but something like 80% accurate. So the test said 80% the child was going to have Tay-Sachs. So knowing that her child would have a disease that would kill it within the first year of life, she decided that she needed to have an abortion. And so these types of diseases, what if we find out things like in China, find out that you're having a girl, decide not to have a girl. Find out that your child has Tay-Sachs, do you say, I'm going to play God? Or do you have the child, and what if that child was in the 20% and didn't end up having it? She really took a chance on whether or not the baby was going to have this disease or not. So just because we know these things, what should we do with the information? So these are some of the diseases, like she was talking about sickle cell anemia. Some of the other ones, cystic fibrosis, that's something that shortens lives significantly. Down syndrome, I'm sure everybody in here has known somebody that's had Down syndrome or seen someone that's had Down syndrome. These are all diseases that we could tell before a baby is born whether or not they're going to have them. And then what does the mother do once she has that information? You can find out if an individual is likely to develop a genetic disease later in life, like breast cancer. You can find out about prostate cancer, find out about skin cancer. Just because you are genetically predisposed to having these diseases doesn't mean you're going to get them. Skin cancer, some people stay out of the sun 100%, wear sunscreen all the time, still get skin cancer. And then people like my mom, who has been a sun worshiper her entire life, she goes outside all the time, goes down to the ocean, lays out. She's never had skin cancer. Why is it some people get these diseases and then other people don't? Has a lot to do with your genetic predisposition to having these different traits. So it leads to these ethical dilemmas, which I think people spend their entire careers studying these things. Discrimination, definitely one of the biggest issues. If you know that somebody has these possible genes, what if they decide that you can't have health insurance because they find out you've got this gene that could make you very expensive later on in your life? There was an entire article that was just written, if any of you saw that on Facebook, about I guess I spend a lot of time on Facebook. If you saw the article written by the guy who said he wants to be dead at 75 because he believes that people don't have any value to their life after 75. And he was saying that nobody should live past 75 because you're not very smart anymore. You're not. You cost too much money. You don't have a good quality of life. He said like he thinks that he remembers his grandparents being like lots of fun and exciting and really neat up until they were 75, and then as their health started declining, he didn't like remembering them like that. So he thinks that everybody should, by the time they're 75. So maybe that's one person's opinion. You might agree with that, but this guy is the guy who helped to write the Affordable Care Act, and so the guy who's writing our laws thinks everybody should be dead at 75. That's kind of a disturbing trend. And just because that one guy says it out loud, how many people think that in the back of their minds? Like, that's super scary to me. So what do you do when you've got information like this? So is this guy making a decision for himself, like, I don't want to be alive anymore after 75? Or is he making decisions that affect all of us? Like, I would like to live past 75. I don't know about any of you guys, but I'm hoping to be alive past 75. I think it's pretty amazing I've made it to 37, so knock on wood or got it above. Yes. Yes, good. And I think that all of y'all will be amazing even past 75. So this was a really interesting story. If you've ever heard anybody talk about the boy in the bubble, this is the picture of the boy who was allergic to everything. And so he lived his life effectively inside of a purified air, purified food. He couldn't go outside. So if this is your version of 75, does he have any quality to his life living there inside of a bubble? So we could debate that all day long. Like, is he too expensive to keep alive? Or is he not worth it because he can't go out and, like, run through the flowers? Or it's really, really interesting. And you get more information, then you change your mind, and then you get other information, and you change your mind. It's just, it's a fascinating question. I think of what I would think of my life living in a bubble like that, confined to one room where you couldn't touch anything. He couldn't see any sunlight because the sun would burn his skin. He couldn't eat any of these different types of foods because he had all these different allergies. But you know, his life's got value, but that's my moral decision. I think his life has value, but maybe the guy who wrote the Dead at 75 article doesn't think that his insurance should have to pay for that. I mean, because that's extremely expensive to keep someone alive like that. It's a really interesting and kind of like a heart-tugging question, and I think that's where a lot of people's moral compass comes into play. And if you're religious, then you start thinking about those things and your philosophical reasoning. And it's so interesting. I don't want to make anybody mad right here at the moment, but we could have an entire conversation about that. So gene therapy has a really poor record of success in curing diseases because once we find out that the genes are there, those genes are inside of every single cell in your body. So there is no way to fix genes that are inside of every cell in your body. The only way gene therapy is going to cure diseases is if we find out and make sure there are no children ever born with these genes. So then again, there's your question, who gets to decide? So gene therapy difficulties, difficulty getting the working gene into the cells where it's needed. If you think about diabetics, if we knew that they had the gene that was going to give them diabetes, how do we then get the gene into those cells that are important in making sure a person doesn't get diabetes or doesn't get cancer? Difficulty getting the working gene into enough cells and at the right rate. to have a physiological effect. So if they fix, say, 10% of my diabetes genes, well, what about the other 90%? 90%? So it's hard to get them into all of the cells fast enough to have a difference. Then we have difficulty arising from the transfer organism getting into unintended cells. So if we try to fix pancreas cells by putting these genes into them, what if the genes get into cells that are outside of the pancreas? And then finally, difficulty regulating gene expression. So how do we fix diabetes and get those genes that are expressed in the right way to fix the right disease at the right time in the right cells? It's just incredibly complicated. And that's why medicine is so fascinating, and it's making such great improvements, and it's so frustrating because when you think you fixed one thing, then 10 other things go wrong. Getting the transfer organisms. So if you're going to fix, like, let's say they're going to try and fix my diabetes. They're either going to fix it using like bacterial cell genes, so the transfer organisms, getting those bacterial cell genes into my cells in the right place at the right time, being expressed in the right way to fix my diabetes. Or they're going to use some other type of cells like human cells. So how do you get another person's human cells into me at the right time, at the right rate? So the question is, where are they coming from? Where are the cells coming from? Are they coming from a pig? Are they coming from a bacteria? Are they coming from another human? Or are they coming from my stem cells? So lots of possibilities, and none of them really work that great at this point. But they'll keep trying, and maybe they'll figure it out at some point. And then, hallelujah, I hope it'll be in enough time that my body is not so harmed from having diabetes that it's like irreparable. It's like finding out that somebody has cancer, and then you're able to cure the cancer, but the cancer has done so much harm that there's no way to help the person overall. You hope you can help them in enough time. So then we get to one that I think students always find fascinating, which is cloning. And I think a lot of times we think of cloning like these human armies of these clones that you can't kill them, and they are going out there and they're like these perfect humans. But cloning really has a wide range of effects, and cloning occurs right now, but just in different ways. Maybe we're not making an exact clone of me so that I can kill them off and take their pancreas and then be cured. Cloning can also be just cloning a single gene. It could be cloning an organ. Like if you've ever seen that picture of the mouse that has the human ear growing on it, that they then transplant the ear to the human. You could clone organs. Or what if they could grow me a pancreas in a test tube? Or what if like this amazing they out there. What if scientists could grow just the cells that were deficient in making insulin for me, and then they could transfer them into my body, and I could be cured? Do they have to make just those cells, or do they make a whole organ? Or is this the fountain of youth where we can make new cells to replace dying cells and then be able to live on forever? There's all kinds of promises, but there's also all kinds of perils. So one of the most famous cases of cloning was Dolly the sheep. And Dolly the sheep was like the first big mammal that was able to be cloned. So what they did in Dolly the sheep was they took an egg cell from one sheep and then a mammary cell from another sheep. They removed the nucleus from the egg cell, and they fused those cells together. So they basically took the nucleus of one cell and put it into this donor egg cell. And then they initiated cell division, and that little symbol right there is with a jolt of energy. So perfect in time for Halloween, like Frankenstein, where they jolt him with electricity and he comes alive. That's what's happening here. So then they jolted it and it started dividing. The 1 cell turned into 2, 2 cells turned into 4, 4 into 8. So they grew this embryo and they put it into the uterus of a surrogate mother sheep, and then the surrogate mother gives birth to this clone sheep, and that was Dolly, and that happened in what year? Is it in the book? Is it in there what year it happened? I don't know why I'm thinking 1996, but that seems like that was pretty long ago. Maybe 2003. Does anybody know what year Dolly got cloned? Or 1996. Okay, I was right with my first guess. Okay, so she was born then. Now, imagine how many times they had to screw this up before they actually made it happen. And then, once they actually made this happen, Dolly only lived 6 years, and a normal sheep lives to be something like 20 years old. And so, Dolly dies early, and she goes through this progression like very, very fast. So, she ages very, very quickly and dies very, very soon. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why cells can't live on forever. But the interesting thing to think of here is if they made this sheep, then at what point are they going to produce a human? And if they clone a human and they know that Dolly the sheep, like their efforts in cloning sheep were so difficult and so many sheep died and came out deformed and that Dolly died early. I mean, she could have lived to be 20 years old. She only lived to be 6. So if we clone a human and humans can live to be 80 years old and the clone dies when it's 15, like, is that an ethical thing to do, playing with life like that? I think it's a really fascinating question, and I will say there's no proof that this is true, but I'm sure they've done it already. I'm sure that they have cloned a human already. Somewhere at one of those countries around the world, they've done it. Because you know there's been all kinds of ethical, horribly unethical experiments that go on out there. Probably in in South Africa somewhere or in the Middle East somewhere. They've done this. We just haven't heard about it yet, but I'm sure that we will soon. So in cloning, we look at Dolly the sheep. She looked identical to her mother. One of the funny things is they went on after Dolly the sheep to do some cloning of people's pets that had died. So like rich people would take their dead favorite lovely kitten that they loved, and they would pay like hundreds of thousands of dollars to get it cloned, thinking they would then have an exact copy of this cloned pet that they had loved. And then the cloned pet turns out to be like nothing like the pet that they had, and they're like, why is this? It's got the identical DNA. So here's like the nature versus nurture question. How much of your pet being this loving, adorable pet that you have is their genetics, and how much of it is the way that you raised them, the way they were exposed to the environment, the things that you fed them, and then just the fact that there's always kind of the roll of the dice when it comes to genetics. So I think there were 2 really big cases of this. There was one with a dog and one with a cat. And the one with the cat was hilarious because the lady was like, this doesn't look anything like my pet. And they were like, sorry, but she paid like $100,000 to have her pet cloned. And then she didn't even get a pet that was like it. What was the movie? The movie where the person, was it a dog or a kid? Maybe I'm thinking of Pet Sematary. Oh, that's creepy. Okay, so I can't say that I thought much about that before this, so I'm not going to go there. But let's say that we have like a prize-winning line of cattle, and we clone them so that we can get even more of those prize-winning cattle. Or you go and you clone your pet because you think, oh, I'll get even more of my wonderfully sweet, awesome pet, and then it doesn't turn out to be anything like it. So how much of it is nature, how much of it is nurture? thinking about medical justifications for cloning. What if they can take my stem cells and grow a perfect pancreas for me that then they transplant into my body? Don't have to have anti-rejection drugs because it is me. They grew it in a test tube. But then, like, my diabetes is an autoimmune response where my body was trying to fight off an infection. Long story. I don't know that I want to have my entire medical history out there, but my body tried to fight off chickenpox and instead killed my pancreas. So let's say they clone my pancreas and stick it back in my body. What if my body just kills it off again? So lots of interesting questions about cloning for medical justifications. Or if you think to those movies where they just grow an identical person and then kill them off so they can take their heart or whatever, it's an interesting question. So getting into something entirely different, let's talk about DNA as this individual identifier. This is something that we're going to be doing in lab coming up here, is the DNA fingerprinting. And one of the first really major cases of DNA fingerprinting was this gentleman who had committed I believe, a rape, and all the men in this town were required to go in and give cheek samples, and he paid somebody else to go in and take the cheek sample for him so that he wouldn't get caught for the rape. And then it turned out he committed some separate crime like many, many years later, and when they took his cheek sample, they had the DNA in the database, and they were like, oh, and you committed this other crime. He thought he had gotten away with this perfect crime. So we used to use fingerprints, but what if you don't leave behind any fingerprints? Well, with a DNA fingerprint, there's no way to fake it. You have your DNA. There's no way to avoid your DNA. Going in to take the test for somebody else, obviously that's one way to try and circumvent it. But what if they're collecting these big DNA databases out there, and you go to jail 20 years from now and they've got your DNA from something else and they can identify crimes? Or how might this be abused in the future? Where might somebody go and put DNA into a crime scene to try and get away with it? It's amazing to think about. So we'll be looking at these bands, which are the A's and T's and G's and C's, passing through what's called a gel electrophoresis. And that's the way we look at what the banding patterns are of your DNA. So just like it could tell if you have genes for certain diseases, or if you might have things that you pass along to your offspring, it also might be able to identify you for crimes. Not any of you, of course. So this DNA fingerprint, what is it essentially? And we've talked about this a little bit in class so far. So a DNA fingerprint, I know that you can't read this, so I will try and make something bigger. Yeah, we'll skip over this, and I will try and get a better representation. What time is it? Yeah, I'm not going to start chapter 6, so I'll start this on Thursday. If there's any questions, I will take those questions, and if not, you guys have a wonderful Wednesday.
You too. Thank you.
Who is calling me? What? What? Oh, I thought somebody said Amy.
Oh, no, but I got a question.
Okay.
When are the quizzes reopened to take
For the lab?
for the lab? Yeah.
Okay. So the quizzes that are in the lab are going to be an hour before and an hour after your lab. But since we had those problems last week with quiz 3 because people didn't know they needed to have their zip card or there were password issues, it's going to be open in the computer-based testing center. Both quiz 3 and quiz 4 will be open whatever day you have lab this week.
Okay, but what time?
An hour before and an hour after.
Okay.
And my next question is, it was a question on there about a potato. What is the answer?
The
Is it-
question?
With the potato, if you put it in distilled water, would the potato shrink?
It would swell.
It would swell up.
It would swell up because if you have distilled water that doesn't have any salt or any sugar or any...
Oh, distilled is regular. Okay, that's where I'm...
Oh, okay.
Oh, my goodness.
No, it helps
gotta
me.
take it.
It helps me to be able to hear you think your way through it because then I know what I need to focus on more next time. You didn't know the distilled water thing.
No, like when I say it
Oh,
was
my
a lot of
goodness.
trick questions, and that was one of them, but it...
Anytime you put something in distilled water, the water's going to go into the cell and make it swell up.
Yeah, it came up twice on my quiz, and I'm like, why did this repeat itself? Oh, yeah. And that's why I'm like, it
sorry.
repeated itself, and I'm like, should I mark
I
it
needed
as
that.
a different answer? Should I mark that the same? I'm like,
And what did you do?
different.
Oh.
And me and her both showed up at the, we left here after we got your email. She got to take the test, and I did.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
What happened? Did you not have your zip card?
Yeah, I have a zip card and everything, and it was open, but the girl helped, the young lady over there, you was over there taking your test.
I couldn't take
couldn't
mine
get
out
in.
early. I couldn't take mine out early. That's why I left. I went home and did my hair.
Oh.
I mean, it wouldn't
wouldn't
let me-
open.
it wouldn't open
He
at
was
all.
like,
It
was
wouldn't
it you
open.
or him who sent the email like, yeah, it's open early or something?
Yeah, he
and then
sent
I'm like, okay, he sent the password. I'm like, cool. I went to the lab because you canceled class and that's the time
Yeah, she
that
the
I
one
went to
came
the
and told
lab.
us.
And I'm like, okay. I'm sitting at the lab. I'm like, why ain't it open? Did I miss it already?
Yeah.
And then it didn't open really until like
Your lab.
yeah,
Time.
like,
Lab time, but
yeah.
see, he didn't say
He didn't say that.
Well,
just said it was
I will
open.
take fault for that. Don't blame him because
That's why you emailed us.
you can blame me for that. I don't
No,
blame
but
your
he said-
TA.
He was like, I know y'all get out of lab, or I know y'all get out of class early, so you know it'll be open earlier.
Yeah, that's
It
what
wasn't
he-
even open
open
earlier.
Oh,
Like the regular
no.
time we get out is 6:25.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he said it would be open before actual lab time, which is 6:40. So you know you would think.
You have
that-
Tony, right?
Yeah.
That's what he was talking about. Okay.
Yeah, just
He
do
sent me an
it.
email or he called me and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Now I know what he's talking
That's what it was. We were sitting there, and everybody was like, "No, he told us to come here," and the girl was like, "I'm trying to figure it out."
Those poor testing center people have to hate me.
They was like, "Oh my God, write this up, write
the
this
test
up."
on
write
Monday
this
because I
up."
was very
When she
busy.
go out the door,
So I think I'm just going to take it as
Okay. Yeah, that would
It's
be
easier because I'm trying to catch
That's
up with
all-
this.
that's all.
Yeah.
Like what I'm learning now, what I learned before.
yeah,
and I
that'll work out better.
Okay.
Yeah. That way we're not going to keep like trying
Yeah.
to catch up with one another. That'll be perfect. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Sure.
I'll see you next class.
See you on Thursday.
Because I asked her, it fell out of my
Yeah, you
book.
can go take it now. It should be open now.
The homework that was supposed to over the weekend, I didn't even see it until the email from Monday.
Okay. I think I was telling her that I'm gonna post like a couple of extra homework assignments, and that way, if you do like 5 out of the 7, you'll get 100% for it. And so, because I know that some people didn't see them, so I will make sure to post a couple of extra ones for the homework. I'll make sure to post a couple of extra ones. No,
No, she closed it.
I closed it
11:59.
11:59.
I'll be
I
at
was
work.
on it. I was asleep.
I will.
Wake up.
Yes.
No, I'll be at work.
I tried to make one for today for in class, and I couldn't figure out how to do it.
What is this? And that's what I.
Those are notes.
Yeah, those are like little study guides for each one of the chapters. They have like the main ideas in it. It's basically like a summary. So if you want to like study those give you like the big picture of things. But
Because
you do a good job of reading, and
Yeah,
so
I've been taking my notes and go on.
Good.
Like, okay.
excellent.
Okay, she's got the what was
Prep
it? Prep you.
Oh, nice. That's always
I
good.
didn't get it with my book.
You don't technically need it, but it's always helpful because it allows you to take like practice quizzes, and on PrepU you can, they're like self-graded, so they'll go back and like ask you similar questions and it'll grade it for you, and it'll tell you like, oh, you know what you're doing, so you don't need to do this, but you didn't know this, so do this. It's like an intuitive type of thing. It's not 100% necessary. I didn't want to do something like, because I think PrepU was like an extra $60 or something like that.
$10.
It's only $10 to buy it off the thing.
Okay, I thought it was like $60.
No, it's not bad.
They,
But that book is expensive.
that book is expensive.
Wow.
That's why I didn't want to make you get the 3rd edition. The 3rd edition's like close to $200. That's ridiculous. That's why I'm trying to do what I'm doing now, because I would like to make it so that nobody has to buy a textbook at all. Wouldn't it be awesome if I could just have like my own website, no textbook, because I think that every professor really, they decide what they want from the book, what's important. I would rather you be able to go to my website and get it as part of the class.
Yeah. See,
I think textbooks are hard to read.
They are. I'm not even gonna lie to you. Those
Nah.
books is better than the ones I tried.
It's
but I was
like,
like,
it just throws me off.
And so every semester I try and create more stuff that goes along with it, so eventually I can get rid of the textbook.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that textbook, it used to be that textbooks were the only place you could get the information from, but now that we have the internet, we don't need textbooks.
so many places, and I was gonna ask
Like
you,
our lab
which
book.
one is this we taking
Remember when
today?
we was talking about that? When we go to lab and I open up my book, like when we took the exam, whatever, certain questions was right there explaining more, you know,
Mhm.
than the book did. You
Yeah.
know, and I understood it then. I said, wow.
Well, that's
I
because
get that question.
I wrote the lab manual and they wrote the textbook.
I said, Amy wrote it.
I know, but I think I'm good at reaching out to my type of student. I think
Yeah.
I'm good with you guys, and maybe those textbooks are good for biology majors, or they're good for somebody in another state. I know Akron, Ohio students at the University of Akron. So I know your
I appreciate
needs.
that. And she will answer your email when she can.
That's right.
I'll be like, what?
You wrote me the longest subject line. You wrote the whole email in the subject. I was like, I wonder.
I was like, I wanted to know
So
what the hell-
today for lab, is we taking a quiz 3 or 4?
Okay, girl.
Both of them are open. Both 3 and 4. Both 3 and 4 are open.
But I did so right now.
If you already did 3, you can take it a second time, like a second opportunity. Or if you're happy with what you got on it, then just keep the score. Good. You might as well try it and see if you can get a better grade, because whichever one's better is the one you get to keep.
Okay, have a